Mafia boss slapped the black girl in front of his men. Then she exposed his lies. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to the main character. Aaliyah Harris stood at the front of the dimly lit room, her heart racing in her chest. She had never been in a situation quite like this before. The Mafia boss, Jimmy DeLuca, stood just a few feet away, his cold gaze never leaving her face. She could feel the tension in the air, the weight of all the eyes on her. The men in the room, tough and ruthless, had all turned their attention toward the scene unfolding before them. Jimmy's reputation was well known. He was feared, respected, and used to getting what he wanted. His men would do anything for him, even if it meant making someone else suffer. But today, Aaliyah wasn't just another face in the crowd. Today, she had something to say, something that would change everything. As the silence stretched on, Aaliyah held her ground, refusing to back down. She had heard enough of the lies, the manipulations, and the cruelty that had taken place in this very room. She had seen the truth, and she wasn't about to let Jimmy get away with it. Her mind raced, going over the details, the information she had uncovered. It was dangerous, what she was about to do. But she knew she couldn't let fear control her. She had to speak up, or else the lies would continue to destroy lives, including her own. Jimmy took a step closer, his presence overwhelming. The room seemed to shrink as he glared at Aaliyah, his jaw clenched tight. "You think you can just waltz in here and challenge me?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Aaliyah didn't flinch. She met his gaze head-on, the weight of his intimidation not enough to make her back down. "You've lied long enough," she said, her voice steady but firm. The room fell completely silent, the tension thick in the air. Jimmy's men shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other. They weren't used to seeing Jimmy, the man who controlled so many, be challenged. They had always seen him as untouchable. But Aaliyah wasn't intimidated. She stepped forward slightly, her eyes never leaving his. "You've used people, ruined lives, and lied about everything. But today it ends." A ripple of surprise passed through the room, and even Jimmy's icy demeanor cracked for a moment. "What are you talking about?" he growled, though there was an edge of uncertainty in his voice now. "I'm talking about the truth," Aaliyah said, her voice ringing out, clear and strong. "The things you've been hiding, they're all coming to light." She pulled out a folder from her bag, tossing it onto the table in front of him. The sound of the papers hitting the table seemed to echo through the room. Jimmy's eyes flickered to the folder, and for the first time, Aaliyah saw a hint of hesitation in his expression. He reached for it, his fingers brushing against the papers, but his expression remained cold. "You think these lies will do anything?" he spat, but the confidence in his tone was beginning to fade. Aaliyah didn't respond. Instead, she waited, knowing that the truth would speak for itself. As Jimmy flipped through the documents, his face grew pale, and the room held its breath. His grip on the papers tightened, his eyes scanning the evidence that Aaliyah had uncovered. For the first time in a long time, he didn't look so untouchable. The men around him exchanged uneasy glances, realizing that the balance of power was shifting in a way they had never expected. Jimmy's confidence had been his greatest weapon, but now it was crumbling. He turned his gaze back to Aaliyah, his voice barely a whisper. "How did you find this?" Aaliyah didn't answer. She didn't need to. The truth was all that mattered now. Jimmy's hands shook slightly as he flipped through the last of the papers, his eyes scanning each line with increasing disbelief. His usual composure, the kind that could silence a room with a mere glance, was slipping away. Aaliyah had struck a nerve. He could feel the weight of his empire crumbling, piece by piece. The documents in front of him weren't just some accusations. They were irrefutable. They exposed his lies, the ones he had buried beneath layers of manipulation and deceit for years. His eyes darted around the room, meeting the cold, expectant stares of his men, who were now beginning to realize that things weren't going according to plan. The atmosphere had shifted, and for the first time, Jimmy felt vulnerable. He glanced at Aaliyah, who stood there with an unwavering calm, her posture straight, her gaze fixed on him like a predator watching its prey. She wasn't intimidated, not in the slightest. Her confidence only seemed to intensify his growing panic. He gritted his teeth and slammed the papers onto the table, his anger simmering beneath the surface. "How did you get this?" he demanded, his voice rough with frustration. Aaliyah didn't flinch. "You're not the only one who knows how to play the game, Jimmy," she replied coolly. "You've been hiding the truth for too long. I just gave it a voice." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, all he could do was stare at her. There was no denying it now. She had won. "You think this will change anything?" Jimmy finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper, but there was a crack in it now, a hint of doubt creeping in. Aaliyah shook her head slowly, her eyes narrowing. "No," she said, her voice steady. "But I think it will change everything for you." He opened his mouth to retort, but the words died in his throat. The truth, the reality of what she had uncovered, was too much to ignore. He was caught. His empire, the world he had built on manipulation, was falling apart. And it was all because of one woman. One black woman who had the courage to speak out. "You think you can walk out of here and expose me to the world?" Jimmy asked, his voice rising again, this time with an edge of desperation. Aaliyah didn't answer right away. Instead, she took a step forward, closing the distance between them. Her presence was commanding, unyielding. "I'm not here to expose you, Jimmy. I'm here to make sure you face the consequences," she said, her words laced with resolve. Jimmy's eyes flickered, the realization settling in. Aaliyah wasn't afraid of him. She wasn't intimidated by his power, his wealth, or his reputation. And that terrified him more than anything. He could feel the sweat forming on his brow, his pulse quickening as his mind raced for a way out. But there was no escape. Aaliyah had outsmarted him, and now he had no choice but to confront the truth. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, slowly, the room began to shift again. The men who had once admired Jimmy, who had followed him blindly, started to exchange uneasy glances. They had seen this man at the top of his game, but now they were witnessing him unravel. They had always followed him out of fear, out of loyalty to the power he wielded. But in this moment, they weren't so sure anymore. Jimmy's grip tightened on the edge of the table as he fought to maintain control. His voice was shaky as he spoke again, though he tried to mask it with arrogance. "You won't get away with this," he warned, but there was no conviction in his words. Aaliyah smiled, but it wasn't one of triumph. It was a smile of quiet strength, the kind that came with knowing you had won, not because of force, but because of the truth. "The truth always comes out, Jimmy," she said softly. "And when it does, there's no running from it." She turned on her heel, her footsteps echoing in the room as she made her way toward the door. The men who had once followed Jimmy now looked at him with uncertain eyes. They had seen something in Aaliyah, something they hadn't seen in their boss. It was respect. It was the kind of power that didn't rely on intimidation or violence. It was the power of integrity, of standing up for what was right, no matter the cost. As Aaliyah reached the door, she paused for a moment, glancing back over her shoulder at Jimmy. "You might have the power, Jimmy," she said, her voice calm, "but it's nothing without the truth to back it up." With that, she stepped out of the room, leaving Jimmy to face the consequences of his actions. The silence that followed her departure was deafening. For the first time, Jimmy realized that he had lost, and there was no going back. The following day, the weight of what had transpired still lingered heavily in the air. Aaliyah sat quietly at her small apartment's kitchen table, the silence around her almost suffocating. The events of the previous day had unfolded so quickly, and yet it felt like a lifetime had passed. She stared out the window, the hustle and bustle of the city below completely contrasting with the stillness she felt inside. Her phone sat beside her, buzzing every now and then with messages and notifications, but she didn't reach for it. She wasn't sure what to do next. Aaliyah had taken down one of the most powerful men in the city, but she knew that wasn't the end of it. In fact, it was only the beginning. The truth she had exposed was enough to make Jimmy DeLuca's world crumble, but she had no illusions about the danger she had put herself in. As much as she had been able to outsmart him in that room, she knew Jimmy wouldn't let this go easily. He was a man who was used to controlling everything, and he wouldn't tolerate losing control without a fight. The knock on the door broke her thoughts. Aaliyah's heart skipped a beat as she stood up slowly, her body tense. Who could it be? Her mind raced through 1,000 possibilities as she made her way to the door. She peered through the peephole, seeing a figure standing there. It was a man in a suit, his face unfamiliar. He wasn't one of Jimmy's men, but his presence alone was enough to make Aaliyah's instincts flare. She hesitated for a moment, then opened the door just a crack. "Can I help you?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The man smiled politely, but there was something about his smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Miss Harris?" he asked. "I'm with Mr. Beckett. He needs to speak with you." Aaliyah's mind whirled. "Mr. Beckett?" She had no idea who that was. "I don't know who you are, or who Mr. Beckett is," she said, her voice cautious. "But I'm not interested." The man didn't flinch. Instead, his smile grew slightly, almost as if he expected this reaction. "He's someone who can help you," he said, his tone smooth. "You've made quite an impression on Mr. DeLuca, and I think it would be in your best interest to listen to what Mr. Beckett has to say." Aaliyah narrowed her eyes, her mind racing. This was unexpected. She hadn't anticipated someone else reaching out to her. She had no idea who Mr. Beckett was, or why he was interested in her, but something about the way the man spoke made her cautious. "I'm not interested in anyone's help," she said firmly. "I'm doing just fine on my own." The man gave a small nod, unfazed by her response. "That's understandable," he said, his voice calm. "But Mr. Beckett believes you're in more danger than you realize. Please, let me at least tell you who he is and why he wants to meet with you." Aaliyah's mind raced as she processed his words. She knew she had to be careful. This could be a trap, another move in Jimmy's game, or it could be something completely different. Still, there was something about this man's demeanor that made her curious. "Who is Mr. Beckett?" she asked, her voice cautious. The man's smile softened. "Mr. Thomas Beckett is one of the most powerful men in the city. He's been involved in some of the most influential business deals in the last decade, and he's someone who values integrity and justice. He's also someone who can help you take down Jimmy DeLuca, if that's what you want." Aaliyah's breath caught in her throat. This was unexpected. She had no idea who Thomas Beckett was, but the mention of taking down Jimmy DeLuca caught her attention. She wasn't sure what game this man was playing, but the opportunity to strike back at Jimmy, to make him pay for what he had done, was too tempting to ignore. "What's the catch?" she asked, her voice steady, but tinged with suspicion. The man's expression didn't change, but his eyes glinted with something that could have been amusement. "No catch," he said. "Mr. Beckett simply wants to meet with you. He believes you have information that can help him with a situation of mutual interest. He can offer you protection, resources, and a chance to get even with DeLuca. But it's your choice. If you don't want to meet with him, that's perfectly fine. However, I think you'll find that his offer is worth considering." Aaliyah stood there for a moment, her mind spinning. This was a decision she wasn't prepared to make. She had already stepped into a dangerous world, and now she was being offered a chance to go even deeper into it. The idea of working with someone like Mr. Beckett was both thrilling and terrifying, but she knew that she couldn't turn back now. "All right," she said finally, her voice steady. "I'll meet with Mr. Beckett." The man smiled, his eyes gleaming with approval. "I'll let him know," he said, and with that, he turned and walked away. Aaliyah watched him disappear down the hallway, her heart still pounding in her chest. She didn't know what this meeting would lead to, but she knew that her life was about to take another unexpected turn. The following day, Aaliyah arrived at the address the man had given her. It was an imposing building located in the heart of the city, its glass windows reflecting the skyline in a way that made it seem both distant and unreachable. As she stood in front of the sleek glass doors, a knot tightened in her stomach. She had no idea what to expect from this meeting, or if she was making the right choice by stepping into this world. But the decision was made. She had no choice but to face whatever came next. Aaliyah took a deep breath, pushing the door open, and stepped inside. The lobby was grand, with polished marble floors and modern artwork adorning the walls. A receptionist at the front desk gave her a polite nod, but Aaliyah hardly noticed. Her eyes were drawn to the man waiting near the elevators. He was dressed in a sharp suit, his posture impeccable, and he stood with an air of authority that instantly made her aware that he was not someone to be underestimated. He saw her and gave a slight nod, acknowledging her presence. "Miss Harris," he said in a deep, calm voice, his tone both respectful and commanding. "Mr. Beckett is expecting you." Aaliyah nodded in response, her steps hesitant but steady as she followed him down a long hallway. The silence between them was thick, each step echoing in the otherwise quiet building. They reached a set of large double doors, and the man opened one of them, gesturing for Aaliyah to enter. "He'll be right in," he said before stepping back to give her privacy. Aaliyah stepped inside, the room exuding an air of quiet sophistication. Large windows lined one wall, offering a view of the city below. In the center of the room was a sleek wooden desk, behind which sat Thomas Becket, a man who seemed to command the space simply by being in it. He looked up from the papers in front of him as she entered, his eyes appraising her with a calm, measured gaze. "Miss Harris," he greeted her, his voice smooth, but with an underlying intensity. "Please have a seat." Aaliyah took a seat across from him, her heart still racing, but she tried to maintain composure. She had no idea what this man wanted from her, or what he had planned, but she knew one thing for certain. She needed to be careful. Becket folded his hands on the desk, his fingers steepled together as he studied her. "I've heard a lot about you," he began, his voice neutral, yet with an unmistakable hint of curiosity. "You've made quite an impact, Miss Harris." Aaliyah remained silent, her eyes narrowing slightly. "What exactly do you want from me?" she asked, cutting straight to the point. Becket gave a small smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "It's not about what I want, Miss Harris," he replied, his tone measured. "It's about what you want. What you've already started." He leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "You've already exposed DeLuca's lies. You've already shaken his empire. But what you might not realize is that you're not alone in this. You're in a position now where you can do more than just take down a man. You can take down a system." Aaliyah's brow furrowed. She wasn't sure she understood what he was getting at, but she listened intently. "I've been keeping an eye on DeLuca for quite some time," Becket continued. "I know what he's capable of, what he's been hiding. And I know how hard it is to fight against someone like him, someone who controls so much. But I also know that the people who are willing to stand up, to expose the truth, are the ones who can make a real difference." Aaliyah leaned forward slightly, her curiosity piqued. "What are you asking me to do?" she asked cautiously. Beckett's gaze remained steady, unwavering. "I'm asking you to join me," he said simply. "You have the information, you have the courage. Together, we can bring down DeLuca and the people behind him. We can expose everything. And in the process, we can start to change the system." Aaliyah felt a surge of emotion, doubt, fear, but also a flicker of hope. This was what she had wanted, wasn't it? To bring down the man who had ruined so many lives, including her own. But she had no illusions. This wasn't going to be easy. This wasn't a simple choice. "What's the catch?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. Beckett's expression softened, just slightly, as he leaned forward. "The catch is that it won't be easy. But the reward will be worth it. You'll have access to the resources you need. You'll have protection. And most importantly, you'll have the chance to make sure the truth is heard." He paused for a moment, letting his words settle in the space between them. "You've already started a revolution, Miss Harris. All I'm offering is the chance to finish it." Aaliyah stared at him, weighing his words carefully. She wasn't sure she could trust him, but she couldn't ignore the possibility that this was the opportunity she had been waiting for. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her, but in that moment, she knew there was no turning back. "I'll do it," she said finally, her voice firm. Beckett's lips curled into a small, satisfied smile. "I knew you would," he said, standing up from his desk and offering her a hand. Aaliyah shook it firmly, the weight of her decision settling in. She had no idea what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was in control. This was just the beginning. Days passed since Aaliyah's meeting with Thomas Becket, and the weight of the decision she had made began to sink in. She had walked out of that high-rise building with a clear sense of purpose, but now, back in the quiet of her apartment, she couldn't help but feel the gravity of the choice ahead. Working with someone like Becket meant diving deeper into a world she had never imagined herself in. As the days wore on, she tried to stay focused, but the nagging question of what exactly she had signed up for gnawed at her. Beckett's offer had been clear: resources, protection, and a chance to expose Jimmy DeLuca and bring down the empire he had built on lies and corruption. But Aaliyah had her doubts. She wasn't naive enough to think that this wasn't a dangerous game. She was playing. It was one thing to take down a man like Jimmy, but what about the system he represented? What about the powerful people backing him? That was the part that unsettled her. She had seen what happens to people who go up against the system, those who think they can fight back and come out unscathed. It rarely ends well. And yet, here she was. She couldn't walk away now. She had made a promise to herself, to those who had been hurt, to those who had been silenced by people like Jimmy. Aaliyah had already taken the first step, and there was no turning back. Her phone buzzed, breaking her out of her thoughts. It was a message from Beckett's assistant, asking if she could meet him the following afternoon. There was no hesitation in her reply. She knew what she had to do. The next day, Aaliyah arrived at Beckett's office. The sleek, modern building had become a familiar sight now, though it still felt foreign to her. She walked through the front doors, past the reception desk, and into the elevator. As she made her way up, she thought about the weight of her decision. She had already been exposed to the power plays, the manipulation, the lies. Now, it was time to step up. The elevator doors opened, and she stepped into the quiet hallway. The assistant was waiting for her, and led her into the same office where they had met before. Beckett was already there, his usual calm demeanor in place. He looked up from the papers on his desk as she entered, offering a polite smile. "Miss Harris," he greeted her. "I'm glad you could make it." Aaliyah gave a small nod and took a seat across from him, trying to maintain her composure. "What's next?" she asked, her voice steady, though she couldn't shake the nervous energy coursing through her. Beckett leaned back in his chair, his hands folded in front of him. "I think it's time to move forward," he said. "We've gathered the information we need, and now it's about taking action." Aaliyah felt her pulse quicken at the mention of action. "What kind of action?" she asked cautiously. Beckett's gaze remained steady as he met her eyes. "It's time to start putting the pressure on Jimmy DeLuca. We've already exposed some of his lies, but it's not enough. We need to make sure that everyone knows who he really is. And we need to make sure he feels the heat from all sides." Aaliyah swallowed, her mind racing. "What are you asking me to do?" Beckett leaned forward slightly, his tone firm. "I'm asking you to help us gather the final pieces of the puzzle. We need to know who's supporting him, who's funding his operations. We need to expose everything, Aaliyah, and we need to do it quickly." She hesitated for a moment, her mind flashing back to the moment when she had stood in front of Jimmy and exposed his lies. It had felt powerful, but now, the weight of what Beckett was asking her to do felt heavier. "And you think I can help with that?" she asked, her voice unsure. Beckett's expression softened slightly. "You've already proven that you can see things others can't. You've got the intelligence and the tenacity to find the truth, even when it's buried. I believe you're the key to finishing this." Aaliyah nodded slowly, still uncertain, but she knew Beckett was right. She had already come this far, and there was no turning back now. "All right," she said, her voice steady. "I'll help." Beckett smiled, his eyes gleaming with approval. "Good," he said. "We're going to take down DeLuca, and we're going to do it the right way. But it's going to take time, and it's going to take everything we have. Are you ready for that?" Aaliyah didn't hesitate this time. "I'm ready." As the meeting concluded, Aaliyah left Beckett's office with a renewed sense of purpose. She didn't know exactly what lay ahead, but she knew that the next chapter of her life was unfolding before her. This wasn't just about taking down one man. It was about bringing down the entire system that allowed men like Jimmy DeLuca to thrive. Aaliyah had stepped into the lion's den, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was in control. The following weeks were a blur of constant movement and late nights as Aaliyah worked with Thomas Beckett and his team to uncover the full extent of DeLuca's criminal empire. She had never been involved in anything like this before. Every step she took brought her deeper into a world of secrets, lies, and power struggles that she had only ever read about in the headlines. But she was determined. Every day, she combed through documents, made phone calls, and pieced together information that seemed disconnected at first, but slowly, it all started to make sense. Beckett was right. She had a gift for seeing the connections others missed. Every meeting she had with Beckett only further confirmed what she already knew. She was in too deep to back out now. They were getting closer to the truth. Aaliyah was starting to see the bigger picture, the network of corruption that had been built over years, with DeLuca at the center, manipulating everything from behind the scenes. But as much as she had hoped to take him down, she couldn't help but feel the weight of what was coming. She was putting herself and those around her in danger. Yet, she couldn't stop. There was too much at stake. It wasn't just about bringing down a man. It was about exposing the entire system that protected him. It was about justice. One afternoon, Aaliyah sat in Beckett's office, her fingers tapping nervously on the edge of the desk. She had just received a tip-off about a meeting between DeLuca and one of his most trusted associates, and Beckett had asked her to attend. It was a risky move. Being in the same room as DeLuca and his men was no small thing. But Beckett had reassured her that this was the final step. Once they had the information from this meeting, they would have everything they needed to expose him once and for all. "You'll be fine," Beckett said, sensing her unease. "We've planned this carefully. You're not going in alone. I'll be monitoring everything from here, and you'll have backup if anything goes wrong." Aaliyah nodded, trying to steady her nerves. "I know," she said, her voice steady, though inside, she could feel the fear building. "It's just, I've never been this close before. It feels like everything is on the line now." Beckett smiled reassuringly, but his eyes were filled with the same intensity that had driven him this far. "That's because it is, Aaliyah. But you're ready for this. You've come this far, and you're going to finish it. This is your moment." That evening, Aaliyah made her way to the meeting place. The location was an old, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, far enough from prying eyes, but close enough to the city that it felt like a strange crossroads between secrecy and exposure. She arrived early, her heart racing as she checked the address one last time. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was going to go wrong, but she couldn't afford to hesitate now. The world she had stepped into was dangerous, but she was committed. As she approached the warehouse, she was met by one of Beckett's associates, a man named Lucas, who was waiting for her by the entrance. "You're early," he said with a grin, his voice low and steady. "We've got everything in place. You just follow the plan, and everything will be fine." Aaliyah nodded, her mind focused. She had been briefed on the plan 100 times, but as she stepped inside, the uncertainty crept back. The warehouse was cold and dimly lit, with shadows dancing on the walls from the weak light that filtered through the cracked windows. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, as she followed Lucas through the narrow corridors toward the back of the building. She could hear the muffled sounds of conversation and the clink of glass bottles from the room ahead. This was it. They were waiting. She could see the men now, seated around a table in the far corner, their low voices rising in murmurs as she entered the room. DeLuca was at the head of the table, his sharp gaze immediately locking onto Aaliyah as she walked in. He didn't smile, didn't offer any greeting. He simply stared at her with that same calculating look she had come to expect from him. "Miss Harris," he said, his voice smooth but cold. "I didn't expect to see you here." Aaliyah stood tall, forcing herself to meet his gaze. She had to stay composed, no matter how much she felt like shrinking under his stare. "I'm here to hear the truth," she said, her voice firm. DeLuca chuckled softly, his eyes narrowing. "The truth?" he repeated, leaning back in his chair. "You really think you're going to find that here? The truth is a commodity, my dear. And it's not for people like you." Aaliyah didn't flinch. She had already come this far, and there was no turning back. "I think you're underestimating me, DeLuca," she said, her tone matching his coldness. "You've been running things your way for a long time, but your time is running out." The room went quiet for a moment as DeLuca's men exchanged wary glances. Aaliyah could feel the tension building, but she refused to back down. She had come here to take DeLuca down, and that was exactly what she intended to do. The conversation continued, and Aaliyah listened carefully, making note of every word, every slip-up. As the meeting came to a close, she knew that she had everything she needed. It was time. With the evidence she had gathered, DeLuca's empire would finally come crashing down. But as she left the warehouse, she couldn't shake the feeling that the danger was far from over. This was just the beginning. The next morning, Aaliyah woke up to a world that had changed in ways she hadn't anticipated. The evidence she had gathered from the meeting with DeLuca was overwhelming. It was everything they needed to take him down, but now came the hard part, getting that evidence into the right hands. She sat at her kitchen table, staring at the stack of documents in front of her, wondering what the next move should be. Thomas Beckett had made it clear that they were ready to strike, but Aaliyah couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. DeLuca wasn't a man who would go down quietly. He would fight, and when someone like him fought, it was never clean. She picked up her phone and dialed Beckett's number. The line rang once, twice, and then he answered. "Aaliyah," Beckett's voice was calm, but she could hear the edge of anticipation in it. "We've got what we need." What's the next step? We need to move quickly, she said, her voice steady despite the nervous energy buzzing through her. I have everything. DeLuca's backers, the transactions, the plans. It's all here. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Aaliyah could tell Beckett was considering his next words carefully. Good, he said finally. I'll have my team prepare the release. We need to get this to the press and the authorities, but we also need to ensure that DeLuca doesn't have time to cover his tracks. We can't afford to give him even a second to retaliate. I know, Aaliyah replied. I'll make sure everything is in place on my end. They discussed the details of the plan, making sure every step was covered, every contingency accounted for. Aaliyah felt a sense of urgency building inside her. This was it. The moment they had been working toward for so long was finally here. But as the plan began to take shape, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the consequences. Once this information was made public, there was no going back. DeLuca would retaliate, and anyone connected to him would likely be in danger. Aaliyah wasn't just fighting for justice now. She was fighting for her life. Later that day, she met with Lucas, one of Beckett's trusted associates, in a small, discreet cafe on the outskirts of town. They had to keep a low profile, especially with the information they were about to release. Lucas was waiting at a corner table when Aaliyah arrived. He greeted her with a brief nod as she sat down. How are we looking? He asked, his voice low, as always. Everything's ready, Aaliyah replied, keeping her voice steady. We just need to release it at the right time. Lucas nodded. I'll make sure the press is ready. As soon as you give the word, we'll get it out. Aaliyah paused, her thoughts racing. Are you sure this is the right move? I know we've all been working toward this, but once we expose him, there's no turning back. Lucas met her eyes, his expression serious. I know what you're thinking, he said. But this is the only way. DeLuca's been operating with impunity for too long. It's time the world knows what he's been doing. Aaliyah nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. She had known what she was getting into when she first decided to take DeLuca down, but now, the full scope of what that would mean was hitting her. She was in too deep. There was no turning back. After they finished their conversation, Aaliyah made her way back to her apartment. She didn't know what to expect when the news broke. Would the world see the truth, or would DeLuca manage to spin it in his favor? She had no way of knowing for sure, but one thing was certain. This was just the beginning. As the hours ticked by, Aaliyah prepared herself for the fallout. She went over the documents one more time, ensuring that everything was in order. The team was ready. Beckett's resources were ready. All they needed now was the signal. Just before midnight, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Beckett. It's time, the message read. Release it now. Aaliyah's hand trembled slightly as she read the message. She took a deep breath, then hit send. The world would know the truth in a matter of minutes. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the gravity of it all wash over her. When she opened them again, she knew there was no turning back. The next few days were a whirlwind. News outlets across the city, then the country, began reporting on the explosive details Aaliyah had uncovered. DeLuca's criminal activities, his connections, and his lies were all exposed for the world to see. The story made headlines everywhere. The authorities were involved, investigations were underway, and DeLuca's empire began to unravel. But for Aaliyah, the aftermath was anything but triumphant. Every time the phone rang, her heart skipped a beat. Every knock at the door made her jump. She knew that DeLuca wouldn't go down quietly. She couldn't afford to relax, not yet. But she had done it. The truth was out, and no matter what happened next, she had exposed the lies that had been hiding in plain sight for far too long. Days passed since the explosive release of the information about DeLuca, but for Aaliyah, it felt like time had come to a standstill. The world around her was shifting rapidly as the consequences of her actions unfolded, yet she remained stuck in the uncertainty of what would come next. The police were moving in, and DeLuca's empire was crumbling, but the deeper she got into the investigation, the more she realized how much bigger this whole thing was. The tip-offs, the lies, the players behind DeLuca. Nothing was as simple as it seemed. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every step she took now felt like it was under a magnifying glass. Her apartment, once a safe haven, now felt like a prison. Each creak of the floorboards, each knock on the door, made her heart race with fear. The truth had been exposed, but the price for that truth was higher than she had anticipated. As much as she had hoped for relief, the storm wasn't over. Aaliyah was in the middle of reviewing some new documents when she heard a knock at the door. She froze. The quietness in the apartment was deafening, her heart hammering in her chest as she stood motionless. Another knock. Hesitantly, she walked toward the door, her hand trembling as she reached for the handle. She paused, unsure of what to expect. Her mind raced through all the worst-case scenarios. DeLuca's men, or worse, someone trying to silence her before the investigation could fully unfold. But when she opened the door, it wasn't a threat she saw standing there. It was Lucas, Beckett's associate. His expression was serious, his eyes scanning the room behind her before meeting her gaze. "You need to come with me," he said, his voice low. Aaliyah felt a surge of confusion and dread. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lucas glanced over his shoulder, his jaw tightening. "There's been a change in plans. Beckett wants to see you." Without waiting for her response, he turned and started walking toward the elevator. Aaliyah hesitated, unsure of what this meant. Beckett had been working with her closely, but this sudden urgency felt different. Something wasn't right. Still, she followed, instinctively knowing that she couldn't ignore this. She couldn't afford to hesitate. The elevator ride was silent, the tension in the air palpable. As the doors opened to the upper floors of the building, Aaliyah felt her pulse quicken. She wasn't sure what Beckett was about to say, but she had a sinking feeling in her gut that whatever was coming next would change everything. When they reached Beckett's office, Lucas led her inside without a word. Beckett was sitting at his desk, his back to her as he looked out over the city. There was a different energy in the room now, more intense, more dangerous. He turned to face her as she entered, his expression grim. "Aaliyah," he said, his tone clipped. "We've got a problem." Aaliyah raised an eyebrow, her worry intensifying. "What kind of problem?" Beckett didn't sugarcoat it. "DeLuca has gone into hiding. We're dealing with something bigger than we thought. And now, his people are looking for you." The words hit Aaliyah like a punch to the gut. She had known that things could get dangerous, but hearing it confirmed made everything feel so real. "What do you mean, looking for me?" she asked, her voice shaking. "I thought we had him." Beckett leaned forward, his eyes hardening. "We do, but the information we've exposed has stirred up more than we anticipated. DeLuca has allies, people who are much more dangerous than him. They're trying to cover their tracks, and that includes finding anyone who knows too much." Aaliyah took a step back, her mind racing. She had thought that once the truth was out, the fight would be over. But now, the reality of what she had gotten herself into was sinking in. She wasn't just up against DeLuca. She was up against a network of powerful people, people who would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. "So what do we do now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Beckett stood up, walking toward the window, his eyes scanning the horizon. "We fight," he said simply. "We push forward. We finish what we started." Aaliyah felt a surge of determination rise within her. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. She had started this fight, and she was going to finish it. "How do we do that?" she asked, her voice steady now. Beckett turned to face her, his expression resolute. "We keep the pressure on. We expose everything. And we don't stop until DeLuca and his people are brought to justice. You're not alone in this, Aaliyah. We're all in this together." For the first time in a long time, Aaliyah felt a spark of hope. She wasn't fighting this battle alone. With Beckett's help and the support of the people who had been working with her, she could make sure that the truth was heard. But as she walked out of Beckett's office, she knew that the Real fight was just beginning. DeLuca's network was vast, and there would be obstacles ahead. But she was ready. She had already come too far to back down now. Days after their meeting, Aaliyah felt the walls of her apartment grow tighter, the weight of the ongoing battle against DeLuca pressing down on her with each passing hour. Every decision, every move, seemed to carry the potential for disaster, and still, she couldn't afford to stop. DeLuca had gone underground, but his network, his connections, were still in place. Every moment felt like a ticking clock. She couldn't help but wonder if she was playing right into his hands. But one thing was certain, she wasn't backing down. Beckett had promised that they would finish what they started, and that gave her the strength to keep moving forward. It had been a few days since Beckett had spoken to her, and although the team had made progress, the situation was more volatile than ever. The authorities were involved now, but DeLuca's influence ran deep. She needed to stay vigilant. That afternoon, Aaliyah received an unexpected phone call. The number was unfamiliar, but she recognized the voice immediately when she answered. "Aaliyah," Lucas said, his voice low and urgent. "We need to talk. Now." Aaliyah's heart skipped a beat. "What's going on?" she asked, her mind already racing with possibilities. "It's about DeLuca. We have a lead, but it's risky. Beckett's team is going to need you." "What kind of lead?" Aaliyah asked, the tension in her voice clear. "We've tracked down one of DeLuca's key contacts, a man named Robert Harris. He's been helping DeLuca move money, and we think he's got information that could blow this whole thing wide open. But we need someone on the inside, someone DeLuca doesn't expect. We need you to go undercover." The idea of going undercover felt like the final step into a world that had already begun to consume her. But she knew what was at stake. "What exactly do you want me to do?" she asked, trying to steady her voice. Lucas explained the plan in detail. She would need to approach Robert Harris without arousing suspicion, gather whatever information she could, and return without alerting anyone to her true intentions. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but the thought of bringing down DeLuca for good kept her focused. Aaliyah spent the next few hours preparing. The mission wasn't one she could approach half-heartedly. Every move had to be precise, every word calculated. She couldn't afford to slip up. That evening, she met with Beckett and his team to finalize the details. "We'll be monitoring everything," Beckett assured her, his face set in determination. "If anything goes wrong, we'll be there in an instant. But we believe Robert Harris is the key. If you get close to him, we'll be able to use him to bring down DeLuca once and for all." Aaliyah nodded, her resolve strengthening. She wasn't in this for herself anymore. She was doing this for everyone who had been hurt by DeLuca, for the lives that had been destroyed in the wake of his empire. The following day, Aaliyah made her move. She arrived at a posh restaurant on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place where people like Robert Harris could be found. She had done her research. Harris was known for frequenting this place, and she had already set up a meeting under the guise of a potential business deal. She walked inside, her steps confident, but her heart was racing. It was a different kind of danger now, one that wasn't as obvious as the physical threats she had faced before. This was a psychological game. She scanned the room, looking for Harris, and spotted him sitting at a corner booth, his back turned to the door. He was dressed in an expensive suit, his posture relaxed, but there was something about him that screamed caution. Aaliyah made her way over to him, keeping her movements casual. "Mr. Harris?" she said as she approached, her voice smooth. Harris looked up, his expression unreadable. "Yes," he replied, his voice cool. "I'm Aaliyah Harris. I've been told we might have mutual business interests." She extended her hand, her smile just the right balance of professional and friendly. He studied her for a moment before shaking her hand. "I see," he said, his tone skeptical. "Let's talk then." They sat down, and Aaliyah kept the conversation flowing, subtly steering it toward the topics she needed to cover. She was careful with her words, keeping everything about the conversation vague yet convincing. She had learned how to read people, how to sense when they were hiding something. Harris wasn't fully trusting her, but he was intrigued. It was a start. Over the next few days, Aaliyah continued meeting with Harris, slowly gaining his trust. She had to be careful, patient. She couldn't afford to rush things. Each conversation revealed more about DeLuca's operations, and Aaliyah felt a mixture of relief and dread as she uncovered new pieces of the puzzle. Harris was a man who liked to talk, but he wasn't an easy person to manipulate. He had lived in DeLuca's shadow for years, and Aaliyah knew it would take time to get him to reveal anything concrete. But every step forward felt like a victory. As the days passed, Aaliyah grew more confident. She was close, so close, but she knew it wasn't over yet. DeLuca's empire was still standing, and they needed more than just one man to bring him down. They needed to expose everything, every piece of his operation. But Aaliyah couldn't deny the growing sense of purpose within her. This was what she had been fighting for all along. She had already come so far, and now, she was closer than ever to bringing DeLuca to justice. The final confrontation was looming, and with each passing day, she knew the stakes were only getting higher. The days following Aaliyah's meetings with Robert Harris were filled with tension. She could feel the clock ticking, each moment bringing her closer to what she knew would be the final confrontation. Beckett and his team had been gathering evidence, and everything was in place. But as Aaliyah stood at the edge of this precipice, ready to push forward, she couldn't help but feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. She had been so focused on taking down DeLuca, exposing his empire, but now, with the pieces of the puzzle in her hands, she understood the full scope of what she was up against. The network was more vast, more dangerous than she had anticipated, and there was no turning back now. The thought of all the people who had been destroyed in DeLuca's wake, the families he had ruined, the lies he had woven into the very fabric of the city, it all pushed her forward. She had to keep moving. That afternoon, as the team prepared to release the final pieces of information, Aaliyah found herself in Beckett's office again. The same sterile, sleek room where everything had started. Beckett was at his desk, scanning over a series of documents, his expression unreadable. "We're ready," Aaliyah said, her voice steady despite the nervous energy thrumming through her. Beckett looked up, his eyes sharp as always. "You're sure about this?" he asked, his tone calm but probing. "Once we release this, there's no going back." Aaliyah nodded, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. "I'm sure," she said. "This is the only way." Beckett stood up, walking over to the window. He didn't say anything for a moment, his gaze distant as he stared out at the city below. Aaliyah could see the weight of the decision pressing on him as well. "We've been preparing for this moment for a long time," Beckett finally said, his voice softer now. "But we can't underestimate what's coming. DeLuca won't just go down quietly." Aaliyah took a deep breath, feeling the gravity of his words. "I know," she said, "but we've got everything we need. This is our chance to take him down for good." Beckett turned to face her, his expression intense. "You're right. But remember, DeLuca doesn't fight fair. He has resources we don't even know about. We need to be ready for anything." Aaliyah's mind raced as Beckett spoke. She knew the stakes had never been higher, but the truth had to be exposed. She had already come this far, and she wasn't going to stop now. The mission was too important. The room was quiet for a moment, each of them thinking about the potential fallout. But then, Beckett spoke again, his voice firm. "It's time. We release the information tonight." Aaliyah nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. The final push was upon them. That evening, as they prepared to make the information public, Aaliyah couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in her stomach. They had done everything they could to ensure that DeLuca wouldn't be able to cover his tracks, but Aaliyah knew better than anyone that nothing was certain. DeLuca had always managed to slip away before. She couldn't afford to let that happen again. When the time came, Beckett's team released the final evidence. The financial documents, the recordings, the names of those who had been complicit in DeLuca's operation. Aaliyah watched from her apartment as the first reports went live, her heart racing with every notification that popped up on her screen. The world was finally seeing the truth. The authorities were already moving, the police making their way to DeLuca's last known location. But even as the world around her began to shift, Aaliyah couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. That night, as the news continued to spread, Aaliyah lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. She had done what she set out to do, but she knew that this was only the beginning. DeLuca's empire was crumbling, but it was far from over. As dawn broke, Aaliyah's phone buzzed again, the screen lighting up with a message from Beckett. "Stay alert," it read. "DeLuca is making moves. He's not done yet." Aaliyah felt a chill run down her spine as she read the message. DeLuca was always one step ahead. He wouldn't go down without a fight. And now, with everything in the open, Aaliyah knew that the Real battle was just beginning. She couldn't stop now. She wouldn't stop. As she prepared for the next phase of the fight, Aaliyah couldn't help but feel a sense of resolve settle over her. No matter what happened next, she had exposed the truth. And no one, not even DeLuca, could take that away from her. The days following the release of the evidence were tense. Aaliyah had expected the world to react, but the magnitude of the response still shocked her. News outlets were flooded with stories of DeLuca's criminal network being exposed. The police were actively pursuing leads, and many of DeLuca's allies were scrambling to cover their tracks. Yet, despite the chaos unfolding around her, Aaliyah couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. DeLuca was still out there, still dangerous. She had known that taking him down would be complicated, but now, with everything in the open, it felt like they had only scratched the surface. The uncertainty was consuming her. She hadn't heard from Beckett for a few days, and her nerves were starting to get the best of her. It wasn't just the threat from DeLuca's empire that worried her. It was the question of whether Beckett's team was truly prepared for what came next. After all, They were dealing with powerful people, and DeLuca had made it clear that he would do anything to protect his interests. Aaliyah stood in her apartment, pacing back and forth. She could hear her phone buzzing on the table, but she hesitated to pick it up. What if it was another warning? What if DeLuca's people had figured out her involvement? Her heart raced at the thought. She couldn't afford to make another mistake. Finally, she reached for her phone, glancing at the screen. It was a message from Lucas. Meet me at the usual place. Beckett wants to discuss next steps. Aaliyah's breath caught in her throat. It was time. She quickly gathered her things and left the apartment, the uncertainty still gnawing at her. The world outside felt different now. The streets were busier, the air more oppressive. Everywhere she went, it felt like eyes were on her, like there was a target on her back. But she couldn't back down. She had come too far. When she arrived at the cafe, Lucas was already waiting for her. He looked up as she approached, his expression serious. "You okay?" he asked quietly, his eyes scanning the room for anyone who might be watching. "I don't know," Aaliyah admitted. "I thought exposing DeLuca would be the hardest part, but now I feel like we're just getting started." Lucas nodded in agreement, then motioned for her to sit down. "You're not wrong. But this is the moment we've been waiting for. DeLuca's empire is on the brink of collapse, and now is our chance to finish this." Aaliyah sat down, the weight of his words sinking in. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. They had exposed the truth, but that was only the first step. The real fight was about to begin. A few minutes later, Beckett arrived, his demeanor as calm and composed as always. He sat down across from Aaliyah and Lucas, his eyes steady as he spoke. "We've been working tirelessly to track DeLuca's remaining assets," he said, his voice measured. "And we've discovered something. A final piece to the puzzle. But it's going to require a delicate approach." Aaliyah listened intently, her mind already racing with possibilities. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice steady despite the growing tension. Beckett leaned forward, his expression serious. "DeLuca has one last card to play. A hidden account, offshore, with millions in assets that no one knows about. It's the final piece that could collapse everything he's built." Aaliyah frowned, trying to process what Beckett was saying. "So what do we do now?" "We need to move quickly," Beckett replied. "The authorities are closing in, but DeLuca is aware of that. He's making moves, and he's likely already prepared to go into hiding. We need to expose this account before he can transfer the funds, before he can disappear for good." Aaliyah felt the weight of the task ahead of her. This was the moment they had all been waiting for, the final blow. "How do we find it?" she asked. Beckett smiled slightly, his eyes glinting with determination. "That's where you come in. We've tracked down the contact who has access to the account. A man named Victor. He's been working with DeLuca for years, and he's the key to getting the information we need." Aaliyah's mind spun as she considered the implications. If they could get to Victor, they could expose DeLuca's hidden assets and seal his fate. But she knew it wouldn't be easy. Victor was a dangerous man, and getting close to him without alerting DeLuca would require precision. "Where do we find him?" she asked. Lucas spoke up this time. "We've located him. He's staying in a private property just outside the city. We have a window of opportunity, but it's small. We'll need to get in, get the information, and get out without leaving a trace." Aaliyah felt a surge of determination. This was it. The moment they had been preparing for was finally here. "I'll do it," she said, her voice firm. Beckett and Lucas exchanged a look, then nodded. "We're with you," Beckett said. "But remember, we need to move quickly. Once we have that information, it's over for DeLuca." Aaliyah stood, her mind made up. "Let's do it." The team moved quickly, assembling the necessary resources and laying out the plan. Aaliyah's nerves were on edge, but she couldn't afford to show it. This was the final step. She had come this far, and there was no turning back now. As the hours passed, and the plan took shape, Aaliyah felt the adrenaline kick in. This was the moment that would define everything. The clock was ticking. Time was running out. And with each passing minute, the stakes grew higher. The night before the operation felt like a quiet before a storm. Aaliyah sat in her apartment, staring at the small laptop screen in front of her, the plans for the mission carefully laid out. Her mind was still racing with all the possible risks. Victor, the contact they needed to interrogate, was known for being slippery, paranoid, and dangerous. If he suspected anything, it could jeopardize everything. But Aaliyah couldn't afford to hesitate now. She had already come too far to back down. The final blow was within reach, and the truth about DeLuca's empire would finally be exposed for good. She checked her phone once again. There were no new messages from Beckett or Lucas, but that didn't put her at ease. The silence only amplified the tension. It was already late in the evening, and the operation was scheduled to begin at first light. Aaliyah had already gone over the plan in her mind 100 times, but there was always the nagging fear that something would go wrong. She would be getting in close with Victor, and the slightest mistake could make him suspicious. The time had come to prepare herself for what she knew was going to be a tense and dangerous encounter. The only way she could shake the anxiety was by focusing on the mission, the endgame. Tomorrow would change everything. She couldn't afford to fail. She stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city. The lights below blinked in the distance, a reminder of the life she had been forced to leave behind in pursuit of justice. A life she would never return to. It had become clear to Aaliyah that this fight was bigger than just DeLuca. The people who had been helping him, the network that had been feeding off his corruption, it was all part of a much larger system. And she couldn't let that system continue. She had to do whatever it took to break it down. With a deep breath, she turned away from the window and prepared her gear. She would need to move quickly tomorrow, stay sharp, and remain calm. She wasn't sure what Victor would reveal or how he would react, but she knew she couldn't let him slip away. If they got the information they needed from him, it would be the key to bringing down the rest of DeLuca's empire. By the time she was ready to leave, the clock was ticking toward midnight. The adrenaline started to pump in her veins as she grabbed her jacket and checked her phone once more. This was it. A few hours later, she arrived at the location where Victor was supposed to be. It was an old, run-down industrial building on the edge of town, isolated enough that no one would notice if things went wrong. She parked her car a few blocks away, then made her way to the meeting point on foot, trying to keep a low profile. Her heartbeat quickened with every step, but she knew this was what she had to do. The contact, Lucas, had been in touch earlier, confirming that Victor would be there. But there was always a chance that he could pull out at the last minute or double-cross them. That was the risk they were taking. She had no choice but to go in and get what they needed. She approached the building slowly, moving cautiously as she checked her surroundings. The streets were eerily quiet, the only sound the crunch of gravel beneath her boots. She reached the door, a rusted metal thing that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. With a steady hand, she pushed it open and slipped inside. The room was dark, lit only by a single hanging bulb in the center of the space. Shadows danced across the cracked walls, and Aaliyah's footsteps echoed in the emptiness. She knew Victor was somewhere in the building, probably watching, waiting. She had to stay alert. A low voice cut through the silence. "Aaliyah Harris," the voice said, smooth and menacing. "I've been expecting you." Aaliyah froze for a moment, her body tensing. She turned, her eyes scanning the room for any sign of movement. There, in the shadows, she saw him, Victor. He was sitting on a worn-out chair, his face obscured by the darkness. But she could feel his eyes on her, assessing her every move. "You're late," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Aaliyah didn't respond right away. She had to be careful. One wrong move, and he could shut down the whole operation. "I'm here to make sure you don't make the wrong decision," she said evenly, her voice steady, despite the tension in her chest. Victor chuckled, the sound low and mocking. "I don't think you understand what's at stake here," he said, standing slowly, his figure shifting in the dim light. "You think you can just walk in and take what you want? You're out of your league, little girl." Aaliyah's eyes narrowed. "I know exactly what I'm doing," she said, her voice firm. "And I'm not here to play games. You're going to tell me everything you know about DeLuca, or you'll regret it." Victor's face twisted into a smirk, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, a hint of uncertainty. He was trying to play it cool, but Aaliyah could sense his hesitation. He wasn't as confident as he wanted to appear. She took a step forward, her voice lowering. "I don't have time to waste, Victor. You're going to give me what I need." For a moment, there was silence between them. Then Victor slowly sat back down, his smirk fading. "Fine," he said, his tone shifting, almost resigned. "But know this, DeLuca isn't someone you can take down easily. He's got more power than you realize." Aaliyah stepped closer, keeping her eyes locked on his. "I don't need to take him down alone," she said. "I just need you to give me the key to finishing it." He stared at her for a long moment, the weight of the situation settling over both of them. Then, finally, he spoke, his voice quieter than before. All right, let's get to work. Aaliyah nodded, feeling a surge of determination. She had what she needed now. The final pieces were falling into place. The end was near, and DeLuca wouldn't know what hit him. With Victor's cooperation, Aaliyah felt the weight of the mission shift. The information he had given her, accounts, secret transfers, hidden investments, was everything they needed to finally bring DeLuca's empire to its knees. But even with the pieces in hand, Aaliyah couldn't shake the feeling that the real test was still ahead. They were closing in on him, but DeLuca was no ordinary criminal. He had always managed to slip away at the last second, and now, with the walls closing in, Aaliyah was more certain than ever that he would stop at nothing to protect his empire. The hours after their meeting with Victor were filled with intense preparation. Aaliyah, Beckett, Lucas, and the rest of the team worked tirelessly to verify the information and ensure they were ready for the final push. The authorities were already mobilizing, but there were still too many moving parts to trust that everything would fall into place without a hitch. Aaliyah sat in the dimly lit conference room, her laptop open in front of her as she scanned the data they had collected. She could feel the adrenaline building up inside her. The end was so close, and yet, it felt like they were walking on a tightrope. One wrong step, and it could all fall apart. "How's it going?" Beckett asked as he walked into the room, his voice steady, but there was a hint of anticipation in his eyes. "Almost there," Aaliyah replied, her fingers moving swiftly over the keyboard. "I'm just double-checking everything. We can't afford to miss anything." Beckett nodded, taking a seat across from her. "I know you're nervous. We all are. But you've done the hard part. Now we just need to execute." Aaliyah took a deep breath, her mind running through the plan once again. They had a meeting set with the authorities, a press conference to reveal the truth, and a final push to seize DeLuca's assets. It was a race against time. "The truth's already out," she said quietly, more to herself than to Beckett. "But I can't help feeling like there's something we missed." Beckett leaned forward, his expression serious. "You're not the only one," he said. "We've all been doing everything we can, but DeLuca's not going to sit back and let this happen. We need to be ready for anything." "I'll be ready," Aaliyah said, her voice filled with determination. "We've come this far, and I'm not stopping now." As they finalized the plan, the tension in the room grew. Beckett's team was in position, and the authorities were closing in on DeLuca's last known locations. But Aaliyah knew that DeLuca wouldn't make it easy. He had too many resources, too many people at his disposal, and there was always the chance that one of his allies would try to make a play to stop them. "We've got to move quickly," Lucas said, breaking the silence. "DeLuca's been quiet, but I don't trust that he's not making plans of his own." Aaliyah nodded, her thoughts racing. "We can't let him get ahead of us. We're moving forward with the press conference tomorrow. The world needs to know what he's done, and we're going to make sure of that." As the night wore on, Aaliyah couldn't sleep. The weight of the next day's events pressed heavily on her. She knew that the press conference would be a pivotal moment, the moment when the truth would finally come to light. But she couldn't shake the feeling that DeLuca still had a few tricks up his sleeve. The next morning, Aaliyah stood in front of the podium, the lights of the press conference blinding her as she looked out at the sea of reporters. Her heart raced, but she kept her composure. Beckett and his team were positioned around the room, monitoring the situation. This was the moment they had all been working toward. The doors opened, and the press conference began. Aaliyah took a deep breath as she stepped up to the podium, her eyes scanning the room one last time. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice steady. "Today, we reveal the truth behind the empire built by one man, James DeLuca." The reporters were instantly on alert, their cameras flashing as they took notes. Aaliyah continued, outlining the details of the criminal network DeLuca had built over the years, how he had manipulated the system, destroyed lives, and exploited the most vulnerable for his own gain. She spoke confidently, knowing that every word she said was another step toward bringing him to justice. As she spoke, the authorities were taking action. They had already secured DeLuca's accounts and assets, and teams were on their way to apprehend his remaining allies. Aaliyah could feel the weight of the moment, the years of planning, the sacrifices, all leading to this one chance to bring down a man who had caused so much harm. When she finished her speech, the room erupted with questions. The reporters were eager for details, for any last-minute revelations. But Aaliyah knew that the hard part was just beginning. The press conference was just the first step. Now, DeLuca would know he was cornered. And that was when things would get even more dangerous. She stepped away from the podium, her thoughts racing as she rejoined Beckett and the rest of the team. "We did it," Beckett said, his voice filled with quiet pride. "The world knows the truth now. But we still have work to do. We're not done yet." Aaliyah nodded. "We're not done until DeLuca is behind bars." As she left the press conference and headed toward the next phase of the operation, Aaliyah couldn't help but feel a sense of resolve. She had fought for this moment, and now she was going to see it through to the end. DeLuca had been exposed, but the final fight was still ahead.